Hello, this is Branko Malic of Kali Tribune. Uh, this will be more or less an announcements podcast. Namely, anybody following our website is probably aware that there is significantly less content than usual the last month. And the reason being a lot of workload on in other spheres of life, and that's unfortunately what we have in summer here. So apologies for this does not mean that Kali Tribune is losing steam, but we just can't continue at the same pace until autumn. Now, there was some discussion on the website about some issues we raised in our previous work, and I will use this opportunity to talk a bit about this instead of simply answering comments, because the subjects are poignant. One of those being the problem of relation of different religions like Islam, Christianity, and so on, and some attempts at explanation why, for instance, some group of religious people behave in a certain manner different than the other. For instance, excuse me, that, for instance, you can explain away why Muslims are Muslims simply by assessing the theology of the Islam, that is to say, lack of thereof, because not that Islam doesn't have theology, but it's not the same affair as it is in Christianity. It doesn't have councils, doesn't have pope, and so on and so forth. Now, I will not go in depth into that. I'm no expert, but I am prone to mention Balkans as, for instance, kind of proving ground to deeper understandings of these religions and their relations, deeper understanding that tends to point you in the docta ignorantia direction, that is, a learned ignorance, i.e., you are not learning how to know, but how to not know. That is to say, you more like shed your own prejudices or your own conclusions when you are faced with certain phenomena of religious nature, putting you in the position that you really cannot give straightforward answer to what is the nature of certain religion and what is the nature of other religion, and so on. Now, this is very difficult thing, because I understand that, especially in the West, people expect to get straightforward answers. For instance, the idea that Islam takes this or that principles, therefore the behavior of Muslims will be like this or like that. You will be able to, and I underline this, predict what it is about. My experience is, that is to say, the position for which I start, that is conditioned by my own origin, is completely the opposite. You cannot. You can only in as much as the given religion is acting as an ideology. And I remember the times when this particular religion did not act so much as an ideology, but it was present. And the believers of this religion had a certain pattern of behavior that is not typical for what in the West people typically consider to be Muslim. So therefore, one can have an impression on Kali Tribune of me, for instance, being quite lenient toward Islam and so on. It's not really leniency, it's just suspension of judgment, to which I am obliged because any kind of straightforward judgments that people and our readers, some of our readers, make are impossible for me from where I'm looking at. They are becoming more and more possible because, for instance, in Balkans and more pronouncedly in Bosnia, Bosnian Islam is transforming. It's transforming along the ideological pattern of the Islam of Arabian Peninsula. Let's use this blanket term of Saudis and Qataris who are buying off land in Bosnia and building mosques, far more mosques that are needed for Muslim people in Bosnia, which are in fact political statements. I won't go deep into that, but there's some real absurdities, and they are transforming the cultural pattern of the country with some significant grassroots resistance, not organized, but significant grassroots resentment from indigenous people, from both religions, all three religions in Bosnia. So it's not from where I'm looking at, it's not that simple as to say that you have this system of notions that if you understand, you will understand the religion. This is not understanding the religion, this is understanding of ideology. And this brings us to a far wider point at which I'm more experienced and knowledgeable than on this particular shaky subject. And that is to say philosophy. A philosophy used as a religion. That is to say philosophy used as an absolute science, as an all-explanatory model, not model, but principle and method, upon which you can take some kind of theologumena, some theological statement, and from this deduce the civilization that is supposedly built upon it. This is something that Hegel did to a large extent with ultimately unsatisfactory and dangerous results, because this is the method that can lead you in a certain direction and provide you with an illusion that you are gaining knowledge, whereas you are deluding yourself. One cannot take, for instance, theology of Trinity, and from this theology, the statements that certain civilization, let's say Catholic, have on this theological issue, to deduce the destiny of that civilization. That would mean that man can comprehend this theological statement, this theological principle, whereas man cannot comprehend it by definition. Attempts at comprehending it are more like spiritual exercise than anything else, but they are certainly not the final and enclosed system that is giving you explanation of what the Godhead is, because you cannot know that. You cannot have positive knowledge. You can have learned ignorance, for instance, and this term of learned ignorance, I'm taking it not from Socrates, as some might think, but from Nicholas of Cusa, Nicholas Cusanus, Cardinal of Catholic Church from 15th century, and polymath, and in fact the father of true philosophical renaissance in Catholic Church, but not so well known as some others, because he remained Orthodox for all his life, and his teachings are, I believe, quite orthodox. I think that Church never passed any negative judgment on him. Also, he was a polymath and a really very tremendously deep thinker, and for instance, this learned ignorance would be shedding off negative knowledge, that is knowledge that is wrong, in order to gain the positive non-knowledge, the positive unknowing, because positive unknowing would be affirmation of something and not negation primarily. It's affirmation of the reality of what is unknown, and to some extent the things as God's own nature, to speak in analogical terms, is not something that you can lay out in the system, that is not something that you can positively know, in the sense that you can, as a subject, make it an object and overpower it, because there is always hidden power relation in this kind of thinking. For instance, I understand Trinity, now I understand why civilization is precisely like this, for instance, European civilization. This means that you are Lord of Trinity, and this is, if you are a believer in the said Trinity, this is very dangerously near self-condemning yourself to hell. So I would be very cautious with these things, and I really try to be. Whereas affirmative, negative, affirmation of negation, in a sense, is a kind of knowledge. A learned ignorance is a knowledge of ignorance, and is in turn a specific kind of intuition of what you are ignorant about. Now, we already talked a bit about this because of unknowability of essential, this or even super essential principles. But ability to know their effects or their activities or their what they reveal of themselves, and sometimes this revelation comes through an ignorance, through making you ignorant of what you thought you knew, of turning you into a kind of child, into infant, epistemological infant that is left with nothing in the end than sucking on breasts of his mother, so to speak figuratively, and becoming like a child, which is nothing unchristian. I think that most people listening to this will agree. So, and it is a methodical process, but it takes existentially the whole of man. This is not merely intellectual, logical operation you do in your head, but something that has to be accompanied with prayer, with a change not only of outlook in life, but behavior in life, and so on and so forth. So somebody following this principle will be very reluctant to pass judgments in this sense. So to claim that one explained away a religion by reading books, I think this is very ill-advised. It is very tempting because you can find some very explicit differences that kind of goad you into thinking, this is why the world looks like this and so on, and I don't think this applies at all. So I'll tell you about something about Balkans, as it was Balkans was a bit debated on Kali Tribune by readers. So Balkans is a place where, to say it most blatantly, East and West meet in some sense, because in a very real way, and it was so even in the Roman Empire, that is to say, especially late Roman Empire, because it was divided in East and West along the river Drina, for instance, this east-west border, which is the border between partly Bosnia and Serbia, although Serbs conquered in the last war a good deal of Bosnian side of Drina, but this was always like a border that Theodosius affirmed, the Emperor Theodosius, as a border between to finally affirm as border between two parts of the empire. So there you can find things intermingling, and common notion is that this brings about clashes, constant clashes and wars and so on, but it brings about other things too, because wars are never too long affairs. Peace can be quite long and uneventful, and nobody in history talks about times and peace. And in peace in Bosnia, I remember very well the way the people thought. For instance, if you had a holy man of one religion, and the holy man would be a man that was able to provide you with healing, for instance, which is a very important aspect of this. His very presence, for instance, could be beneficial to your well-being or well-being of your family. Nobody asked what religion does he belong to. Now, this is very peculiar for these parts of the world, and they were respected no matter what their adherence was. And if you had any experience with such people, you would very soon notice that this was very well founded, because those people were able to bring about quite concrete effects to the beneficial of others. So once you see this, no matter the fact that you won't change your religion, because we are here very much rooted in these religions. We don't choose them on a whim. We don't choose them on grounds of study, like philosophies, as most people in the West, as far as I can see, do. That is, people who publish on internet, who do kind of apologetics or whatnot, are mostly converts from something into something else. This is not the way how it works here. Here people change the religions for money and for political influence, for quite materialistic reasons, which is, in my opinion, less dangerous, because it doesn't touch heart in some in such to such a degree, and it of course renders one completely dishonest and sleazy and so on. But it also reveals that the person in question is not very keen in being deeply religious. But I see a lot of people who in the West who publish on internet really have this desire for something that is that should touch them deep inside, and call it then spiritual journey and so on and so forth. The only spiritual journey traditionally in this part of the world one can discern is the way home. That is to say, return to where you belong, because at the outset, when you're young, you kind of try to walk out of it to something else, to something you choose, but something always brings you back or holds you back, and then the journey would be the moment when you finally surrender and say, okay, that this is what I am, I cannot escape it, and I should not escape it. So it's quite different thing. Now, this does not jive well with the idea that some religions are true, some are not. And I am completely aware of it, and I have no answer how to reconcile these things. But if I were to choose the path where I study religions and then say, out of these logical systems they have, theological apologetic systems, theology in the terms of apologetics, where there is always a political moment, I would have to deny my own life's experience and things I saw. I cannot do that. One should not do that. And this puts me at a disadvantage of giving straightforward answers to some questions. I cannot give them because I simply don't understand how things, quote unquote, work. But I pride if that could be called pride, on the knowledge that I don't know. And I think that's a good starting point for anything. Although you most certainly can spend the whole life in this unknowing, but it's better than false knowing. And this false knowing applies to a whole plethora of people now who are trying to be apologists for religions, certain religions on internet. From what I saw for Catholic Church, people who are this independent, non-sanctioned laymen, quote-unquote Catholic apologists, are almost to a man if the Westerners ex-Protestants that converted, and sometimes in the matter of month or two, they are advocating return to tradition, conservative, ultra-conservative Catholicism, and so on and so forth. This is something that any old woman I could meet and talk to in this area where I live would find completely baffling. How is this possible? Because you cannot really change your own ancestry, because Americans, I guess, British and so on, if not for generational Protestants, living in Protestant countries. I think USA is very much a Protestant country in terms of political outlook and constitution, which is, as I can see, revered almost in a religious manner. This is something unthinkable in Catholic country, and that's maybe the reason why Catholic countries as a political entities don't function so well in a worldly political sense, because you cannot have this total adherence to a document, a religious adherence to a political document. In the back of your mind, you always kind of like don't believe that you can have a document which gives you a blueprint from what amounts to utopian society. You have to be born and raised into in some kind of non-traditional sect that believes in this transformation of the world to have this belief. So people who are born into this, for generations their parents lived into this, and they just by reading books conclude that it's far better to be Catholic. I would pose to think, are they really Catholics? Not to speak of these far Eastern religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on. I mean, you cannot just convert because these are worlds apart. I'm talking about something that is relatively close. Although I am from Eastern Europe, we don't have and never had much to do with Protestants. It's Orthodox and Catholic. If there is any clash or communal living, it doesn't have to be clash. It's between Catholic and Orthodox, and we far better understand each other. Whereas I believe in the West, Western Catholics and Protestants have this understanding of mutual mindsets. So these are very different things, and these apologists are doing very lousy job, in my opinion. They are not sanctioned by church, of course, but they and their adherents, I think, tend to believe that they are some kind of vanguard minority that is adhering to true church, while the actual church is going down. I think they are quite deluded in this, because the church, talking about actual church, is built upon, not built upon theology or philosophy. It was, at least, you are obliged to believe this if you are Catholic. It is built by the act of God. in history. So you can act good or bad, a member of the church, but its essence you won't change. And its essence you won't finally corrupt or finally heal, because it is not given to you. And the very idea that in this apologetic sense people can just convert and after 2 or 3 months of intensive reading start to reform the Catholic Church, because their mind is reformist, and doesn't matter if this reform points to some good principles, for instance, to return to medieval scholastics or theologians, which I, for instance, so I don't have to return because I never moved further from them, nor do I incline to. I think what they are doing is just doing what they were raised to do, and the real conversion would be something far more difficult and something far more something that would make them far more humble, because they would understand that they have a lot to learn, and that if anybody should be able to do apologetics, theology in the public, would be maybe their children or their children's children, because that's how it used to be. Bar exceptional instances like Saint Paul the convert, who was Pharisee or Sadducee, I'm not sure he was Jewish, was in fact an enforcer, an inquisitor of Jewish religion, and but he got converted by Jesus Christ himself. So I don't think it's very prudent to make comparisons with him. And this is really the problem. I address this because I don't, Kali Tribune don't do this thing. This is a project where most of the principles are not explicitly advocated, but we are trying to let them imbibe everything we do, which is, I think, a good thing. For instance, J.R.R. Tolkien did that with his Lord of the Rings, where he never explicitly mentions God even, and the whole book is Catholic morality play. So there is no need, and it was extremely influenced in 20th century. So it's far better to do this, to let acts speak, and the essence being tucked away safely in transcendence where it belongs. So, to conclude with what I started, to get back to it, this is just to make few clarifications. Obviously, this is not a structured discussion. Maybe there will be some of that. Maybe Mihai and I will do this, because we both think about these problems from two standpoints, and can be very interesting. We'll see. But as I said, this is summer in Croatia, a lot of work, so we are moving slower than usual, and I feel obliged to point this out, that unfortunately it has to be like this until mid-September, and I feel quite obliged to people who donate and support the site, just for them to know that they are not forgotten, and that I much appreciate what they do. So, thank you for your attention. This was Branko Malic of Kali Tribune signing out.